Chapter 21, Section 2, The New Immigrants. This is the continuation of the third wave of immigration. The main idea of this section is that millions of immigrants, mostly from Southern and Eastern Europe, moved to the United States. Why does it matter today? Because the new immigrants had an important role in shaping the American culture in the 20th century, also known as the early 1900s. Key terms and names that are defined for you and can be found in the Google Classroom: new immigrants, Ellis Island, Angel Island, melting pot, assimilation, Chinese Exclusion Act. Please make sure to have your homework and therefore your notes open as you watch this video, ready to turn in when this video is complete. One American story. In 1907, 10-year-old Edward Corsi left Italy to come to America. After 2 weeks at sea, he caught sight of the Statue of Liberty.
The symbol of America inspired awe in the hopeful immigrants. Many older persons among us, burdened with 1,000 memories of what they leaving behind, had been openly weeping, now somehow steadied, I suppose, by the contents of symbols of America's freedom. They dried their tears.
Edward Corsi, In the Shadow of Liberty. In this section, you will learn about the immigrants who came to the United States around 1900 and their effect on the nation. First, though, let's do our SOAPS analysis on Edward Corsi's quote in One American Story. So, first of all, who was the speaker? You should already know that. I've said it a couple times already. That would be Edward Corsi. What is the occasion? Who is the audience? What is the purpose? Is it to inform, entertain, or persuade? And what is the subject or the overall main idea of this primary source quote? Pause the video for a few seconds, up to a minute, 2 minutes, whatever you need, and answer each of those questions, and I'll come back and go over that with you.
But no, I met him. I understand.
Okay, so we're back. You should have realized that the speaker was Edward Corsi. We've already talked about that. The occasion, when and where did this take place? Well, the when is 1907, okay, and it was after 2 weeks at sea, so it'd still be 1907 when Corsi caught sight of the Statue of Liberty. So notice I went back to the context, not just strictly from the primary source to get that information. Right? Who's the audience of this primary source? Most likely he's probably writing to a relative back in Italy, possibly, or he's keeping a journal for himself, so he could be the audience, or he could be intentionally keeping a historical record for what we would call posterity, right, for the future. What is his purpose? To entertain, inform, or persuade? I would say it would be to inform. And what is he informing us about? Well, about how this symbol of America, the Statue of Liberty, inspired awe in the hopeful immigrants, because many of them had been burdened with lots of memories about what they had leaving behind, and now, by the concreteness of the symbol of America's freedom, meaning the statue over here itself, by actually seeing it, right, that ultimately dried the tears of the immigrants and are now inspired with hope. The new immigrants. Until the 1890s, most immigrants to the United States had come from Northern and Western Europe. Remember, that was Scandinavia, which is Norway, Sweden, Denmark, as well as the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Germany. But after 1900, fewer Northern Europeans immigrated and more Southern and Eastern Europeans did. This later group of immigrants came to be known as the new immigrants. Southern Italy sent large numbers of immigrants. Many Jews from Eastern Europe and Slavic peoples such as Poles and Russians also immigrated. Russia would be found north of the Ukraine, and Poland would roughly be found in this area, north of the Czech Republic and east of Germany. Ellis Island was the first stop for most immigrants from Europe. There, they processed before they could enter the United States. First, they had to pass a physical examination. Those with serious health problems or diseases were sent home. Next, they were asked a series of questions. Name, occupation, how much money do you have? Slovenian immigrant Louis Adamek described the night he spent on Ellis Island. He and many other immigrants slept in a huge hall. Lacking a warm blanket, the young man
shivered sleepless all night, listening to snores and dreams in perhaps a dozen different languages.
While European immigrants passed through Ellis Island on the East Coast, Asians landed at Angel Island and San Francisco Bay. In Angel Island's filthy buildings, most Chinese immigrants were held for several weeks. One unhappy prisoner carved in the wall,
For what reason must I sit in jail? It is only because my country is weak and my family poor.
Many Mexican immigrants entered the United States through Texas. Jesus Garza recalled how simple his journey was.
I paid my $8, passed my examination, then changed my Mexican coins for American money and went to San Antonio, Texas.
Settling in America. Immigrants settled where they could find jobs. Many found work in American factories. The immigrants contributed to the growth of cities such as New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Chicago. About half of the new immigrants settled in 4 industrial states: Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania, and Illinois. Once in America, newer immigrants looked for people from the same village in the old country to help them find jobs and housing. People with similar ethnic backgrounds often moved to the same neighborhoods. As a result, ethnic neighborhoods with names like Little Italy and Chinatown became common in American cities. The immigrants living in these communities pooled money to build places of worship for their neighborhoods. They published newspapers in their native languages. They commonly supported political machines, often led by politicians who had also come from their country of origin. Such politicians could speak the native language and help the new arrivals feel comfortable. Most importantly, politicians could help immigrants find jobs. Immigrants take tough jobs. Immigrants took whatever jobs they could get. Many immigrants worked in northern factories. As we saw in Chapter 20, which we actually didn't read, most factories offered low wages, long hours, and unsafe conditions. Many European immigrants who had settled in the East found jobs in sweatshops for about $10 a week. One observer of textile sweatshops noted,
The faces, hands, and arms to the elbows of everyone in the room are black with the color of the cloth on which they are working.
while European immigrants settled mostly in the East and Midwest, Asian immigrants settled mostly in the West. Many Chinese immigrants worked on the railroad. Others settled in Western cities where they set up businesses such as restaurants and stores. Large numbers of Japanese immigrants first came to Hawaii in 1885 to work on sugar plantations. Others settled on the mainland where they fished, farmed, and worked in mines. Immigrants from Mexico came to the Southwest. Mexican immigration increased after 1910 when revolution in that country forced people to flee. Growers and ranchers in California and Texas used the cheap labor Mexican immigrants offered. Owners of copper mines in Arizona hired Mexicans as well. Becoming Americans. Some Americans have described the United States as a melting pot, or a place where cultures blend. Today, however, as you can see on the right side of your screen, we take the melting pot idea where the theory is that immigrants are required to assimilate to become one common American culture versus the salad bowl theory, in which calls for, instead of everything melting together like in a salad, each ingredient retains its own individual identity but together becomes a salad or one common identity. In this case, the African, the Chinese, the Irish, the Italian, the Mexican, the Russian all still have their identity, but together they make the salad, or they become, that salad is the American culture. So we keep our diversity, but also we are one as Americans. The new immigrants blended into American society as earlier immigrants had. This process of blending into society is called assimilation. Most new immigrants were eager to assimilate. To do so, they studied English and how to be American citizens. Many workers began to assimilate at work. Employers and labor unions both tried to Americanize immigrant workers by offering classes in citizenship and English. A Lithuanian worker explained that his labor union helped him learn to read and speak and enjoy life like an American. He then became an interpreter for the union to help other Lithuanians become Americans. At the same time the immigrants were learning about America, they were also changing America. Immigrants did not give up their cultures right away. Bits and pieces of immigrant languages, foods, and music worked their way into the rest of American culture. Despite their efforts to assimilate, immigrants faced prejudice from native-born Americans. Many Protestants feared the arrival of Catholics and Jews. Other native-born Americans thought immigrants would not fit into democratic society because they would be controlled by political machines. Such prejudices led some native-born Americans to push for restrictions to reduce the numbers of immigrants coming to America. Much like we hear today from many native-born Americans that we should restrict the amount of immigrants coming into the United States. So it's really not a new concept here in 2015 to hear of people wanting to restrict immigration and do things to change the way immigrants come to this country. Restrictions on immigration. Many native-born Americans also feared they would have to compete with immigrants for jobs. Immigrants were desperate for jobs and would often take work for lower wages and worse conditions than other Americans. Some Americans worried that there would not be enough jobs for everyone. These fears led to an upsurge in nativist opposition to immigration. In 1882, Congress began to pass laws to restrict immigration. They placed taxes on new immigrants and banned specific groups, such as beggars and people with diseases. Non-whites faced deeper prejudice than European immigrants, and Asians faced some of the worst. In 1882, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. It banned Chinese immigration for 10 years. The Chinese Exclusion Act was not the only example of prejudice in America around 1900, though. So this is the end of the section. We will continue to talk about prejudice with immigration, but at this point, I'd like you to be able to answer a few questions. The first one, how were the new immigrants different from earlier immigrants? Think about that. Next, how did immigrants support one another once they came to the United States? Third, why did non-white immigrants, like Chinese Americans and Asian Americans, have a harder time assimilating than European immigrants did? And finally, how well does the idea of the melting pot reflect the United States immigration around 1900? The idea of all cultures coming together and melting together to become one Americanized version of an identity. Think about that assimilation, think about immigrant languages and cultures, and think about the ethnic neighborhoods that popped up throughout the cities in the United States. Right? After you have thought about and answered those questions, please make sure to complete your notes that are your homework and submit them, turn them in through the Google Classroom. And we will see you in class tomorrow.